Good evening, everyone. I'll just introduce our speaker. Mani Rao will present her translation of the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient philosophical text central to modern Hinduism. The author of 8 books of poetry, Mani Rao's work has appeared in various journals internationally, as well as such anthologies as HarperCollins Anthology of Poetry by Indians, and the Blood Axe Book of Contemporary Indian Poets. She worked in television and advertising in India, Hong Kong, and New Zealand for 20 years before turning to literary and social interests full-time. Scholarly interests full-time. She was a visiting fellow at the Iowa International Writing Program in 2005 through 2009, and the 2006 University of Iowa International Program's Writer-in-Residence. She has an MFA in poetry from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and is currently a PhD student in religious studies at Duke University. Her translation of the Gita is published by Autumn Hill Books, and I believe also Penguin India. Yep. I guess I'll present Mani Rao.
Thank you so much for having me here. I was here in Ames 3 years ago, in the fall of 2009. I spoke at the library. I think it was the Indian Cultural Association, yes, and thanks a lot to all the sponsors, and actually especially to Nitin, who's been very patient as we worked out the dates and made sure that we didn't, not do this. So thank you to everyone for coming. Since 2009, I've had 2 books out. One is a book of poetry called Ghostmasters, and then this is the translation of the Gita. Today I'm going to be talking about the Gita, my experience of it, and talk a little bit about the strategy. Before I get into the actual text and how I see it, let me go through a little bit of history. Is it not loud enough? Okay. So I'll keep the introductory part short. I want to begin by saying that let us remember that the Gita is an ancient text, but it's always in the news. It's always here and now, especially these days we see. This is a news item from last week, the 8th of November. It shows Tulsi Gabbard. She's here called America's first Hindu congresswoman who plans to take her oath on the Bhagavad Gita. So the question I want to raise here is that when somebody takes an oath on the Gita, what does it say about them? And it says something about their allegiance to a particular tradition. And what does the Gita actually stand for? You may know that the Gita recitation was a part of the daily routine for Gandhi. Gandhi really adopted the Gita. He considered it a synthesis of a lot of the Hindu scriptures. He explains the war in the Gita as an allegory. He read the war as a struggle between dharma and adharma, and the central message of the Gita to be anasakta, or detachment. By following the true message of the Gita, one would automatically be non-violent. Just as Gandhi formulated his political strategy on the basis of the Gita, so did his assassin, Nathuram Godse. That's Nathuram Godse. In his deposition statement, he explains his reverence for Hindu religion, Hindu history, and Hindu culture, and cites the Gita. Arjuna had to fight and slay quite a number of his friends and relations, including the revered Bhishma, because the latter was on the side of the aggressor. One of Gandhi's contemporaries, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, he saw the message of the Gita to be pravritti, or energism. The Gita, he said, teaches us to kill even our teachers and our kinsmen. Tilak and other extremist nationalists embraced the concept of a political missionary who resorts to violence as a part of duty or dharma. Interestingly, Swami Vivekananda, who spoke at the World Parliament of Religions, said Indian men needed beef, biceps, and Bhagavad Gita. So you see that the message of the Gita is actually a mixed bag, using the same platform, the same text. Different people have used it to support different ideologies. Along with urging towards equanimity, detachment, self-control, and devotion to God, there are contrary messages. The acceptance of war and violence, because everyone's really eternal, or because the enemy's fate is already predecided, birth caste as having divine origin, and intercaste mixing as problematic. When Krishna presents two distinct paths, jnana, knowledge, and karma, activity, duty, ritual, Arjuna is confused. Krishna then recommends both. But above all, he recommends detachment. Not doing anything does not free one from karma, and renunciation does not guarantee liberation. There is more, and that is the path of bhakti, or devotion. All of these paths are referred to as yoga. So this pluralism, or multiple paths and multiple solutions, it is believed is the reason why Gita has survived and flourished through the centuries. If you type Bhagavad Gita in Amazon, you will see over 4,000 entries. There are thousands of translations, then there are commentaries, then there are dictionaries. There is a lot of literature on the Gita. In my own childhood, the Bhagavad Gita was a part of the environment. I don't remember when I first heard the Bhagavad Gita. Born and raised in India, I studied Sanskrit in school in the 70s, and the shlokas, or the verses of the Gita, were a part of the curriculum. We also had stories from the Panchatantra and Hitopadesha. They are similar to Aesop's fables. Each story ended with a moral lesson. And we studied Subhashitani, which are proverbial sayings, which also made a point about what was ideal and what was not. There were some verses from the Gita everyone knew, and I did too. I could rattle them off in my sleep. There was Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadashana, that told you do your work without thinking about the results. There was Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glanir Bhavati Bharata, which told you that, whenever there is evil, where the increase in evil, then God incarnates in India. Then there was Vasam Sijirnani Yatha Vihaya, and the few verses that go after that, which talks about the eternality of the soul, how indestructible it is, and how imperishable it is. Now, in my mind, the entire Gita was represented by these handful of verses. That's what I thought the Gita was. And the Gitopadesha scene, which is what you see here in this wall decoration, it was a part of the decor, even in restaurants, where Krishna is advising Arjuna. So it's a very iconic scene. It's in the middle of the two armies. And the Gita was being quoted all the time in newspaper columns, like the Speaking Tree in the Hindu, or on TV programs by some orange-clad Swami or the other. It was all over the place. And yet, I thought the Gita was those few essential verses that I had studied. I'm sure that I even had a couple of translations in my bookshelf and may have browsed through them, but I was never motivated to read it. It was not a text one had to read or find or even notice. In fact, I only ever saw elderly people studying the Gita, and I thought that would be the time for it. Don't get me wrong, I know many young people surely care for the Gita. I'm sharing my experience because it was a background to my discovery of the Gita. Anyway, it was only when spiritual interests became primary in my life, sometime in 2005, when I was in my early 40s, that I read the Gita in Sanskrit for the very first time. I mean, the entire Gita as a continuous narrative. And I was stunned. I experienced it as a poem. It had a lively internal symmetry, a light alliterative touch, assonant word pairings that helped clarify meaning. There was highly functional wordplay. I found it lively, complex, provocative, dialogic, intelligent. The verses felt clean, strong, sure, and good in the mouth. And then I found no one I talked to about this shared my experience. On probing, I found that most people who I knew and considered informed, highly literate, and culturally aware had never actually read the entire Gita in Sanskrit. Many were familiar with translations, and no one thought very much of the Gita beyond its content, its philosophical content. That was how I found myself thinking of the Gita as a literary work. On the surface, it seems plain boring. 700 stanzas long, but no real action, no change of scene. The entire text really a monologue posing as a dialogue. Although Arjuna's dilemma is the trigger for the Gita, he doesn't get to say very much. His main speech is in the first chapter, where he explains his quandary. And after that, in the 11th chapter, where he's overwhelmed by Krishna's Vishwarupam, or universal form. In many other chapters, he only gets to speak a single verse, which serves as a prompt, and in some cases could even be dispensed with. If I were a dancer, and I had to choose a scene to perform from the Gita, I might choose one of two options. Chapter 1, where Arjuna drops his bow and doesn't want to fight, and from chapters 11 and 12, where Krishna shows his divine form. Now, if you have seen Peter Brook's Mahabharata, which is quite spectacular, you see that the Gita is the slowest segment. Then it suddenly cuts to the close-up of the two faces. Krishna is saying something in Arjuna's ear, and in the battlefield, everyone's looking at each other and wondering what is going on. Now, let me also replicate that experience or impression by articulating how it is sung. This is how the Gita is usually sung. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samavetaayuyutsavaha mamakaha pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. Now, actually, the norm is for all the verses to be sung in that style. And in this first verse, the melody, which flows so smoothly, not in my rendition, but it flows so smoothly in that tune, does not convey the drama and the context. The verse is actually not the beginning of the story. Its context is turmoil and questions. Who does the kingdom belong to? Each side thinks that they are in the right. Peace talks have failed. Duryodhana's jealousy goes back to sibling rivalry. The big day is here. They can't wait to get started. They wait for revenge, resolution, and they are eager to fight. What blind Dhritarashtra wants to know is not a jovial dharma kshetre kurukshetre. It's not jovial. It's not tell me a story, nor is it a cool, casual, by the way, what's going on. It's not like that. In fact, the drama is implicit in the words. It's dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsava mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. That's what's really happening in that verse. It's all that feeling which is there, which through repetition and through the pervasive nature of the text sometimes gets missed. So with that as an introduction, I'll read one excerpt from my translation and then discuss more textual elements such as translation strategy. So this first part I want to read is from 1.01, which is the very first verse, until 1.32, and then followed by the turning point for Krishna and Arjuna. Dhritarashtra to Sanjaya. And when it came to that, might, right, face off, what happened? Who did what? Sanjaya. Duryodhana took in the enemy lineup and said to Dronacharya, "No thanks to you, Professor. Trained by you, Drishtadyumna, chief of the other side, has put it together. A who's who of heroes, each a Bhim and Arjun. Yuyudhana, Virata, Drupada, Drishtaketu, Chekitana, and the king of Kashi, Purujit, Kunti, Bhoj, Bulish, Saibya, Yudhamanyu, Uttamaujas, Abhimanyu, and the famous 5 sons of Draupadi. Not that we're less prepped. We've got Bhishma and Karna and Kripacharya and Ashwathama and Vikarna and the Somadatta sons and all sorts of weapons on their fingertips. For my sake, their life on the line. And yet it's not enough. Our Bhishma to their Bhima. So in every move, stick to your roles. Keep your head, Bhishma, safe." Grand Lion Bhishma bellowed, "Yeah," and blew his conch, erupt his troops, took it up on drums and cymbals and trumpets. What a riot! Until from a sleek chariot on white steeds leapt unearthly sound, Krishna's Panchajanya and Arjuna's Devadatta. Then Bhima's hungry Poundra, King Yudhishthira's victory call, Nakula's nice stone, Sahadeva's gem bloom, each announced himself unique. King of Kashi, Sikhandi, Drishtadyumna, Virata, unbeatable Satyaki, Drupada, his sons-in-law, the 5 Pandavas, and power arm Abhimanyu revved, shook earth and sky, busted your sons' hearts. Armies all set, weapons about to clash under the hero Hanuman banner. Arjuna reached for his bow and paused to Krishna. "Sir, can we go to a vantage point between armies? Who's there to fight for evil? Who's sweet on evil? Duryodhana." Chariot parked in no man's land in front of Bhishma and Drona and all the chiefs. Arjuna said, "See," and saw familiars, foster fathers and fathers' fathers and fathers-in-law and uncles and teachers and brothers and friends and godsons and grandsons, and said, "Pitiful. These people, war urgent, are my people. I feel drained, my mouth's dry, my tremble is me, my every hair in shock, my bow slips, I'm feverish, I can barely stand, my mind wheels. All the signs are grave, no good can come from killing my own. Don't want to be a hero, don't need no empire. What's there to enjoy? What's the point of it all?" And then I will skip to 2.11, where Krishna responds. Krishna: "Nice speech, Arjuna. But the truly wise know better than to be sad over life that's gone or not. Life and death pass. I was never not and never won't be. You too, and them. You change in this body from child to adult and decrepit, and you change into another body again. Sensations, cold, heat, pleasure, pain are mortal. They come and go. Stay unruffled by them, get ready for immortality. If it isn't, it isn't. If it isn't true, it isn't real. What you call reality is really virtual reality. Your reality is materiality. Material, changeable, mortal, untrue, immaterial. It seems as if, but there's no truth in fiction. What is clear to a seer." So with that introduction, let me go into some examples of translation questions and decisions. So here is a prose translation of the very first verse that I've talked a little bit about, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. The prose translation would be, and this is actually a translation from a book, a 2008 translation, "On the field of Dharma, Dharma Kshetre, in the field of the Kurus, Kurukshetre, they have assembled and are eager to fight. My men on one side and the sons of Pandu on the other. What did they do, Sanjaya?" Yes, this is a translation, but for me, it is inadequate. A representation of, an explanation of each of the words in the original. It does not acknowledge the depths, the resonances of the context. Dharma can be translated as righteousness, virtue, truth, duty, kshetra as field, region. Dharma kshetre in translatese is in the field of righteousness. And all the gravitas of the Sanskrit word and the import of the scene is lost in the repetitious habit and history of literal translation. When I let kshetra speak to me, I gather more than field. It means in the area of, in the realm of, in the matter of, at, of, context. Dhritarashtra's question equates dharma and kuru. The physical place Kuru is not just the scene or setting, it is larger than life, context, the situation. In this verse, place and situations have converged into a point of no return. I translate this as when it came to that, placing pressure on that. I note the tension in the sound, yuyutsavaha. These warriors are keen to have it out. I have a mental image of two sides facing and about to unmask themselves. I take in the words, my sons and Pandu's sons, with their full weight of what has gone on in the Mahabharata up until that point, might versus right. What did they do equals who did what happened first, next. Tell me, Sanjaya. While I was thus responding to the Gita at the level of the stanza, it did not always result in this kind of divergence from literal translations. But no matter what the solution, there are a handful of principles at work. I had begun by constructing a set of parameters, or what are called expectancy norms. That is, what must my translation feature over and above fidelity to meaning? Within the context of the epic Mahabharata and a part of the Smriti tradition, the Gita is Krishna's speech, spoken word. Krishna's tone varies. He is patient, he is mocking, assertive, and authoritative, and Arjuna trusts him. The reader, same as Arjuna, must feel relaxed in the presence of the text and feel its immediacy, feel it here and now. The phonemic value of the Gita is not a thing in itself. When the Gita is sung or chanted, it is mostly to celebrate or memorize or remember the meaning. The Gita is not a mantra, although it may be used as one. Its language is self-aware, but it is not convoluted, ornate, or display-oriented. Communication leads everything. Unlike classical Sanskrit poetry with compound words, suggestiveness, and complicated metaphors, the Gita's language is actually simple. The purpose of Krishna's speech is to resolve Arjuna's moral dilemma. Therefore, comprehension is vital. These gave me my parameters. Some other parameters I derived from the grammar of Sanskrit language. In Sanskrit syntax, word order is interchangeable. For lists, if the sequence did not matter, I changed the order in the translation. I follow the order of the text, verse by verse, but I take the cognitive unit variably as it occurs at each instance in the Gita, in the line, in the stanza, or sometimes across a group of stanzas. I will show you a few examples. Sometimes a phrase is related to two phrases. Different combination of phrases yields more ways of understanding them. Sometimes a verse has a core set of words and the other words are marginal to it. A more free lineation style I found helped. Not capitalizing stresses the informal, relaxed conversational nature of the teaching situation and creates the flexibility to work with space on the page and to let meaning be read forwards and backwards, vertically and horizontally, which also I will show you. Also, the Gita's content can be confusing. Different margins in my translation help organize the content for better communication, and sometimes space helps communicate different narrative threads. So here's an example. Here's an example of how the margins might help organize information. So she who recalls, and all of that is one unit, the first poet, Gavana, who anchors all subtler than atom, When it's time to move on, mind steady, charged with devotion and yoga power, and the next two lines expand on yoga power, goes to the ultimate being. So visually what happens is you take in what's happening on the right, as well as you have a grip on the narrative thread of what's happening on the left. Margins also help when words repeat. So here you have Aneka Vakta Nayanam, Aneka Adbhuta Darshanam, Aneka Divyabharanam, Divyaneko Udyatayudham. I think it's got stretched a little. Okay. So Aneka is myriad or many, and that is common to all of those points there. And same for Divyamalam Malyambaradharam, Divya Gandhan Lepanam, and in divine garlands of clothes, perfumes, and balms. Also, the margins help emphasize something. This is from the Vishwarupam scene where Arjuna is seeing. And in the Sanskrit, Pashyami comes on again and again. He repeatedly talks about what he is seeing. And when you read it, you're very aware that this is actually a visual experience for him. So by using that set off from what else is happening, I'm able to emphasize the experience. So over and above this target form or style that I work with, I respond to what about each stanza or section strikes me the most. Now in this section, Arjuna is full of himself. I just read this before when he's talking about how he feels. He feels drained, his mouth is dry. He uses a lot of personal pronouns. And by using all the personal pronouns on one side, all creating an impact together, I'm replicating the effect of how I experience it when I read the Sanskrit. Whereas if it was all mixed up in a literal translation, the reader of the English translation doesn't have the same experience. Many times in the Gita, there are long lists of qualities. There are long lists of qualities or adjectives which are better bundled together so that you can go on with the next point. This is a fact. If you are studying the Gita verse by verse, you still want to keep track of what is going on in the narrative thread. You may spend as much time on it as you wish, but you still want to have an overview of it. And this marginal style helps. Sometimes the tone dominates, and what I hear as the refrain in this set, what I hear in this section of the Gita is Asmi, Kalo Asmi, what I am, So this is not actually the Kalo Asmi section, but in this section 7.06, 7.11, this entire section is about who he is. Raso aham apsukanteya prabhasmi shashi suryayo pranavas sarva vedeshu shabdakhe paurasham drundashu. And then every single quality, buddhir buddhimatam asmi, every single quality he talks about how he is. So there is that very I am dominance. Krishna states who he is. This is before the Vishwarupam scene where he lets Arjuna know that he is everything and that he is God. And then there are the actual terms themselves. Available correspondences for Gita's pivotal concepts such as Brahman, Atman, Karma prove uncommunicative. Atman, for example, is regularly translated as soul or self. Soul is a safe and familiar word, but it is vague, for we do not know exactly what it refers to, and self is a concept understood in different ways. Sometimes Krishna is referring to you, and sometimes to the ungendered, immortal, indestructible it, who you really, really are. In fact, what happens in the Gita is he doesn't use the word Atman. The narrator says Dehi. Dehi as in that which has the Deha, that which has the body. And a couple of verses later, it's Enaha and Ayam, right? So he's talking about this and that. It refers to Atman as that and this, and then creates the relationship with Arjuna. A couple of verses later, he says, the Dehi is in all bodies. Or, I'm sorry, he says the Dehi has all bodies. He says all bodies, he makes the relationship. The next step, it's actually subtle, and we would have to go through the full verse-by-verse analysis for me to see how that shift happens. He makes Arjuna understand something about the Dehi. The Dehi is that which has a body, and then connects it with, you are that. That is who you are. So, without saying Atman, he makes Arjuna understand that he is not the body, he is that which has the body. That's how the leap happens. And in this, what I do is I use the Neti principle, which is a negative, via negativa approach, which is used a lot in the Upanishads. By you discard, you are. That is, you are not, and what you are. You discard old clothes for the new, you discard one worn-out body for another, you are not your body. And then the next couple of verses, I combine them by showing weapons, fire, water, wind cannot, these are the things they cannot do to what? You don't want to say soul because the Gita doesn't say it. So this, who you really are, is indestructible. So it's when you read the translation that you understand it rather than you are told so. And thus the experience of reading the Sanskrit is replicated. That's about the strategy. With so much on the nitty-gritty of the translation process, I will read another excerpt, which is a part of the Vishwarupam section, and then we can talk about it. This is 11.10. Sanjaya to Dhritarashtra. And then Vishnu, the powerful Krishna, showed his ultimate divine form to Arjuna. Myriad mouths, eyes, divine jewelries, raised weaponries, what a sight! In divine garlands and clothes, perfumes and balms, infinite, omniscient, facing all directions, at once, so wondrous. If 1,000 suns rise together in the sky, imagine that the brilliance of this awesome one. There, with Krishna, Arjuna saw in the body of the God of gods a diverse one universe. Arjuna, overcome by surprise, goosebumps, bowing his head, said reverentially, "Oh my God, I see in your body deities, a gathering of all sorts of beings, Brahma seated on a lotus, divine serpents and all the sages. I see you everywhere, infinite form, myriad eyes, arms, bellies, faces, no end, no middle, no beginning. I see the deity of the universe its form. I see you, so hard to see in totality, with a crown, club, discus, blazes, sun, fire, radiance, infinite mass of light shining everywhere. I get it. You're the highest goal of knowledge, the deepest anchor of the world, everlasting, undying defender of eternal law, the original one. I see you without beginning, middle, end, infinite arms, infinite strength, your eyes the sun and moon, your mouth a blazing pyre, by your brilliance the universe afire. In all directions you, O Solo, you fill the whole, between heaven and earth, the three worlds, shudder at this, a terrible marvel, form." And 232. Okay. There I see hordes of deities going into you. They're terrified, they praise you, make reverent signs. Hordes of great accomplished sages, they say hello, they praise you profusely in hymns. They see you, the Adityas, the Rudras, Vasus, and Sadhyas, all the deities of the universe, the Ashwins, the Maruts, the ancestors, hordes of Gandharvas, Yakshas, demons, and the accomplished, and they're all bewildered. Seeing your myriad mouths, eyes, arms, thighs, feet, bellies, and gory teeth, the worlds shudder, and so do I. Seeing you ablaze, a spectrum touching the sky, mouths agape, fury, expansive eyes, O Vishnu, I tremble within. I find no peace. I can't stand it. Seeing your mouths, your gory tusks like the end of time blaze, I don't know where I am. I can't find a place. Have mercy, deity of deities, home of the universe. All of Dhritarashtra's sons, with hordes of kings, Bhishma, Drona, Karna, and our main warriors too. They rush into your mouths, tusks, gory, scary, some caught between your teeth. See crushed heads. The heroes of the human world enter your blazing mouths as river currents run to the ocean. The worlds hurry into your mouths to be destroyed, frenzied moths to flame. All around you devour, you lick all the worlds with your fiery mouths. While your brilliance fills the worlds, your rays consume them. Tell me who you are, sir, oh so ferocious. Salutes to you, O best of deities, mercy. I want to know, original one, about your ways. I have no clue. And just a few verses later, you are the deities. Wind, death, fire, water, moon, Prajapati, first ancestor. Salam to you 1,000 times, and again salam, salam. Salam from the front, from the back, from all sides surround salam, O omniscient, to endless boundless valor and force. You are the end of everything, so you are everything. From ignorance of your power, tipsiness or fondness, I've been rash, said what not. Hey Krishna, hey Yadu boy, hey buddy, thought you just friend. If for joke's sake, when we went out or lay back, I've treated you disrespectfully or sat around or ate in privacy or good Lord in front of others, I beg pardon, O unfathomable. You're the father of the world, of the animate, inanimate, its worshipped, weighty teacher. There is nothing like you in the three worlds, so how could there be anything better than you, oh, of incomparable glory? So actually I have more slides, more examples, more detail, but I think I should, at this stage, see what particularly you'd like to discuss if you have specific questions, and then I can take it from there. What do you think? Or do you want to hear more from the translation, like reading? Any questions? No one knows. Anonymous. Some scholars date it between 200 BC and 200 AD. Others will say it's much older than that. But it's a part of the Mahabharata. Technically, it's Vyasa. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Six. Yes. Hmm. Hmm. That's right. It is a contradiction. There are lots of parts of the Gita that are contradiction. In fact, that particular example is used by certain communities, especially the Arya Samaj, to say that even Krishna is referring to an omniscient another. And he uses the word Prabhu as well. Worship Prabhu. So that is used as an example by some groups of people to say that this is a person who is referring you to a formless power. There are lots of areas that are contrary to each other, and it's a whole subject in itself, all the interpolations, alleged interpolations in the Gita. Some say that the entire Vishwarupan section is really not, doesn't feel like a part of it. It is odd because the whole scene is over, and then Arjuna turns around to, okay, now tell me more about the gunas. It's almost as if it hasn't happened, and the meter shifts. So, who knows? Oh, the Sthita Prajna is the steady-minded, dedicated, steady-minded person. Arjuna's main question is, what is the nature of the Sthita Prajna. Who is this person? How does she walk, and how does she talk, and what does she do? How does she sit? And in response to that is where Krishna talks about the nature of the Sthita Prajna, and a lot of the qualities he describes are qualities that he repeats later in the Sattvic section. He talks about being detached and how the mind is steady, how the senses are withdrawn, just like a tortoise withdraws its limbs into its shell, and how the person is not affected by sensations that come and go. And so that becomes really the ideal that he sets up for Arjuna to be steady-minded, the Sthita Prajna. Yeah, but I mean, ultimately it's very interesting because actually Arjuna is a Kshatriya. And if you look at the guna sections where he talks of Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, you find that non-violence is part of the Sattvic section. And even though he says that everybody has a path with devotion. So this is another very interesting aspect of the Gita. If you look at the classical Brahmanical order of things, you have one path on which you pass through different life stages, right? You have the brahmacharya, then you have the grihastha, then you have the vanaprastha and the sannyasa. Like one by one, you go through each life stage. And then that's when you're contemplating God. But what happens in the Gita is, while it doesn't upset the status quo, because the varnas, all the castes are divine, right? And then you have the duties. Everybody should do their own duty. So on the one hand, it doesn't upset any status quo. It actually offers liberation to everybody, because anybody can offer a leaf or a water or a flower with devotion and can achieve, with love, can achieve sort of the ultimate goal. So that is what is very, very interesting. You may see that as diplomacy, or you may see that as a very highly intelligently pluralistic text, which works very carefully with established doctrine and then goes beyond it, which is probably why it appeals to so many different kinds of people, and everybody makes it their own. You look at Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's commentary, and he focuses entirely on bhakti, on devotion, and he talks about Krishna as the supreme. You look at the Chinmayananda commentaries, and they're all about Advaita. They're all about non-dualism. So everybody makes it their own because they read that. Even into the Jnana sections, Bhaktivedanta reads bhakti. And Shankara's commentary, even into the bhakti sections, he reads knowledge. So it's very, very, very fascinating. Anybody else? I don't actually know. The one thing I want to say is I only translated the text. So I don't know what soul is. I mean, I can tell you what the text says, and then I can tell you everything I know from my reading and all the research that I did around it, but I'm just the translation. So I'm just the translator. So does detachment lead to nonviolence? That's what Gandhi thinks. That's not what Tilak thinks. He thinks that in a detached way you can be violent. You do your duty in a detached manner. That's pravritti, right? So two different interpretations. I really don't know the answer. I would say that from my reading of the Gita, what I understood was that non-violence comes back later, in the later chapters, under the sattvic guna only. It doesn't come back in the rajasic guna, it comes back only in the sattvic guna. So then, does that mean that the sattvic person who is detached can be non-violent, but the rajasic person who is detached can be violent? That's one way to look at it, right? That's really all I can offer in terms of my familiarity with the text. I can't answer the question in a deeper way. Exactly. And you know, the interesting thing is if the answer had been in the Gita, I don't know if it would have the same attraction as it has to us today. We still ask that question. I mean, the text doesn't solve it for us. The Gita doesn't solve it for us. The solution is in the commentaries. So there is a whole tradition of commentaries. You have Madhva, you have Ramanuja, you have Shankara, depending on who you go to for an answer to this. And honestly, I don't think that any one answer is right. It cannot be. It's an opinion. It's a perspective and it's an opinion. You'd have to make that choice at every moment. Also, I don't know if it's absolute, as an absolute directive for every possible combination and solution and question in life. It's probably a question that has to be asked again and again and again and solved each time differently. Do you know the answer? Yeah. I think that's part of why it's a fascinating text. It is an open-ended text. We never really feel satisfied. But my answer to it came with understanding Arjuna's role as a Kshatriya, that he was doing his duty. Because, you know, Krishna says it's better to do your own duty badly. Sorry, it's better to do your own duty badly than to do somebody else's duty well. So stick to your role in life. So that is also the brilliant, very cunning stance that the Gita gives you. It's not upsetting the status quo. Everybody stays in their own positions. At the same time, you can be liberated. It's interesting. It's really fascinating. No, what happens is in the later chapters, there is an elaborate discussion. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Okay. The three terms I'm talking about are Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic. These are terms that also come up in Sankhya philosophy. The idea is that Prakriti, or nature, is made of gunas, or qualities, and that these qualities are combined in different ways in order to come up with these overall characteristics or personalities of Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic. Sattvic is, Sat is true, pure. Sattvic is the lightest, the purest. It is defined in terms of the kind of diet, let's say fruits and freshness and wholesome diet. Somebody who loves nonviolence, who loves truth, who loves purity, who loves silence. Those are qualities associated with the Sattvic. The Rajasic is the pleasure-loving, might prefer sort of, is the passionate, is the pleasure-loving nature. The Tamasic is a slightly more sluggish nature. So these are the three gunas that are discussed. In fact, the Sankhya philosophy that people talk about is slightly different from the Sankhya which is in the Gita, because the Sankhya-karikas, which really evolved the whole Sankhya philosophy, came later, right? It evolved the Sankhya philosophy into a much broader doctrine. But in the Gita, you see the basic elements of it, the idea of Purusha, which is the animator or the animator of the Prakriti. The Purusha is actually literally person. So Purusha, Prakriti is actually it is also masculine, feminine idea, which later, in later tantric traditions, becomes the Shiva Shakti idea as well. So Prakriti, which is nature, I know this is all starting to get very complicated so Prakriti, which is nature, everything has all the gunas. So it's nothing is only Sattvic or only Rajasic or only Tamasic. Everyone, all of us have all the gunas in combination, and depending on what we do, some are more prominent. And as we evolve, we are supposed to cultivate certain qualities more than others particularly to perform certain roles. Is that a summary that works? I don't know if you want to see a couple of examples of how expansion works. Usually what happens in Gita translations is you have a translation which goes line by line. One line is translated by one line, and one word is translated by one word. A lot of times it's difficult to understand what is going on. Take this, for example. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. Ubhayor api drishto antastu anayos tattvadarshibhihi. So here is Bhaktivedanta, Swami Bhaktivedanta's translation. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent there is no endurance, and of the existent there is no cessation. This seers have concluded by studying the nature of both. The translation is actually as difficult to understand as the text, if not more. So the challenge is also when there is something completely incomprehensible, am I to deliberately simplify it for the sake of making the translation readable? And the answer is no. There are some verses where I've translated them and I have a nagging feeling that actually this doesn't actually make coherent sense, and I would leave it. That's the best I can get out of it. And sometimes those verses, even Shankara has not given a lot more coherence than that. So having looked at commentaries and looked at everything, that's the best I can do. So there is interpretation involved in the translation. No matter what you do, interpretation is going to be there anyway, right? But in this, what I have done is I have expanded and included my commentary into the translation. So you're not reading 5 paragraphs of footnotes after you read the translation, which you don't understand. But as you read the text, the explanation is included into it. Whenever I've included a point which I think is actually not a part of the original, I have put it in parentheses, so that you know that that is actually not in the original. I think, like, for example, if there might be a stanza and another stanza, and I might put in parentheses but, because that's the connection that I see in it. It's actually not in the original. That is parenthetical point. But in this case, this is an expansion of what I think the text actually says. So those 4 lines have actually expanded into all of those lines in the translation. So it's not one word translated by one word or one line by one line. Sometimes 2 stanzas may be collapsed into 4 lines. Here, for example, simple example. Loke asmin dvividhanishcha pura prokta maya anagha. So, in this world, 2 kinds of bases anciently taught by me, anagha, blameless one. There's a passive voice used there, maya, taught by me. And the focus is simply, I just take that construction of passive and turn it into active, because the essence of it I see as just focuses on I. What Krishna is saying is he's emphasizing on himself. So as I said ages ago, 2 paths. Because nishtha is not just basis. So here, for example, tasya sanjanayan harsham. Here, harsham is what happens is when Bhishma makes a sound with his conch. It produces a lot of joy in Duryodhana. So that gives me the mood. So looking at every aspect of the original, I take a clue from it and I build it into the translation. So that is really a part of the strategy. I think the slides, in terms of textual analysis, that's about okay for this presentation. Any more discussion, I'd be happy to have. Or otherwise, I'd read another section, yeah.
So English is just another language. Did you come into ideas that just there's more than words for them, or not phrases for them?
Actually, there are phrases for them, but the question is how tired they are and whether they actually work. There are omniscient is omniscient. Sometimes facing all directions, I took that as omniscient because, the person who knows everything is facing all directions. So there's interpretation involved in that. Words like eternal, powerful, these are all standard words, and then they're not exact equivalents of what the Sanskrit word may be, but it's the closest you can get to, and sometimes you wonder if you ought to be a little bit more inventive, and the limit is if you get more inventive, it starts to sound strange. So you have to balance the comfort, the level of comfort when reading. So you gloss over some things, and then the parts you really want to draw attention to, you want to pay more attention to that with changing the language. So sometimes I have made words, combined unusual words. Yeah. Yes. It is. It is possible. Actually, there is a lot of discussion on this about what parts are interpolated, what parts are originally there. Some will say that, in fact, it's only 70 verses that make up the Gita, and it's not 700 verses, and that actually happened over time. It's more about adding rather than losing, I would say, although we will never know. We have manuscripts, we have commentaries that use the text of the manuscript, so that way you know what the manuscript is. Like Shankara's commentary is 8th century, let's say. So then if he's commenting on each verse, that verse gets repeated in the commentary. So then, and that over the centuries gets passed on, written down on palm leaf manuscripts. So we have those traditions, and that is the Gita that everybody follows, and so that is the standard Gita that I have used. That is the edition I've used. By a pure devotee? I see. When I have had questions, I have consulted my guru's speeches. But also, I've also gone through the Shankara's commentary and the Madhva's commentary, and I've gone through a whole lot of scholarship on it. And sometimes the resolution, my guru is Sai Baba, so I've looked at his discourses sometimes to understand something better, and it has helped. Other times, it's just a sense of intuitive feeling. You just have to trust that. Luck and fortune. Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay, yeah. They say that if you really yearn for a guru, the guru finds you. Because I knew I'd gone